everyone, and welcome to Disrupt the Game Industry Culture for Good, starting from square one. My name is Trinidad Hermida. I'm the head of diversity and inclusion at Niantic, and I would like to get this party started by jumping in, quite frankly, into the deep end, and we're going to start with square one. In order for us to really, truly dig deep into this conversation around culture, around diversity and inclusion and equity, we really have to get on the same page. And I'd like to use this exercise of asking a couple of questions that are questions that we might not ask every day, but are telling on where our journey is. Question number one, diversity asks, who's in the room? Equity responds, who is trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? Inclusion asks, has everyone's idea been heard? Justice responds, whose ideas won't be taken seriously because they aren't the majority? Diversity asks, how many more of Black people in a group do we have to have this year or encourage in recruiting? Or how many more Latinx hires do we need? Equity responds, what conditions have we created that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority here? Inclusion asks, is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? And justice challenges, whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining dehumanizing views? Pretty tough questions, huh? But these are the questions that we need to tackle in order to disrupt game industry culture. I'd like to start with a quote from one of my favorite Pokemon, wink, wink. Of course, I work with Pokemon Go, but Mewtwo is one of the strongest Pokemon. And in all of my interactions with Pokemon Go, I love catching Mewtwo's, because I feel like if I got the strongest Pokemon in my deck, that I can conquer and do anything. One quote is, I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are. And I'd like to unpack that a little bit with what is our gift. As humans, we all have a genius inside of us. And that genius is something that the universe has given us as a gift to the world. And how are we using that gift? Let's go back to those questions and talk about how we can use our gift to counteract and use our privilege to counteract some of these questions. Question number one was, who is trying to get in the room but can't? How can I use my privilege or access, authority to fix the problem? Who's in the room? If I see everybody who looks like me in the room, how do I create access for people who don't look like me, who can bring a diverse thought, who can bring different ideas that can make us more innovative? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? How can I stand up and be an ally advocate for this person? If you're in a meeting and someone is saying a great idea, and then people just overlook it and keep on going, as another person in the room who noticed this great idea, you can stand up and say, wait. Let's take a moment to hear Laura's idea. Let's take a moment to hear Sam's idea. That's using your privilege, your access, your authority to create space for someone else. Another question, whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't in the majority? Thinking back to myself, how can I back up innovative thinkers who don't have support because they are not in the majority? How do I open doors for people who have great ideas but just don't have access? Seems so simple, doesn't it? Next, what conditions have we created that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority here? I'd like to talk about the systematic cracks that are blocking the minority to access stretch roles, promotions, or even clearance to go to the next round in interviews. How are we utilizing these systems and saying, you know what, there's some cracks in here that are blocking people with access? Have you ever thought that maybe, just maybe, bringing someone on site who doesn't look like you, maybe the interview didn't go as right or as perfect as you'd like it, but saying, you know what, I'm going to pass them through so that they can have an on-site interview. Maybe they'll do better in person. Next, which I do not want to look over, because as you know right now in the game industry, we are grappling with a lot of things. Whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining dehumanizing views? How can I support people who are bringing up ideas that might threaten the majority on their practices? How can I support people who have ideas that might threaten other people? I think that's something that we sit back and we think about, and I'm like, wow, me as a woman in the industry that is majority men, you know, I go out to a happy hour and I'm in the happy hour and I feel uncomfortable, so I leave. When I bring that up to someone, are they going to say, you know what, you shouldn't have felt uncomfortable. Let's address it. Let's call on the people and make sure that you feel safe working in this environment. That's an ally. That's an advocate. The opposite is pushing it under the rug and not giving the right energy towards something that could eventually help generations to come. So I'd like to move on from that, but I just want you to know that there's no way that you would ever hear me say that this is okay. I truly believe that if anything, our jobs and our opportunities in the game industry should be safe. Just that little tidbit. Now, let's talk about ways that we can move it to action. I did talk about some questions that had answers on how to be an ally. But a lot of us are stuck in either one of these places: head, heart, and hand. Head is, I'm convinced that we need to change, but it's stuck in my head. I know that there's data out there. I know that I've heard it on Harvard Business Review. I've heard it on Bloomberg. I've heard it everywhere. There's so much that we need to do, and it's going to help our bottom line. This is stuff because we have facts on facts on facts that this diversity and inclusion and equity work will increase your bottom line, will make your employees happier, will create an innovative workspace. But if it's stuck only in my head, how am I going to get to action? So moving on to the heart. There's a distance between the head and the heart. It's a little bit shorter than the heart and the hand, but this is where I observe, I feel, I want to change. Like, hey, everything that's going on in the world right now with the Black Lives Matter commitment, and we can see that it's wrong. People are dying without any type of regard for human life. Wow, I want this to change. That's when we get to the heart. But if we want it to change and we stop right there, no action is actually done. So how do we get from the heart to the experience to actually try and change? The capability to change. That's a vulnerable place, y'all. So many times we in this industry love to fast fail. Let's try a new game and see if it works. Put all the effort behind it, put it out there and watch it. But when it comes to humans, when it comes to people, we're a little bit more apprehensive to actually empowering that change and that ability to fail. We are going to fail. Just wanted to let you know that. There is no silver bullet to this. And as we move forward and try new things, we may not do it exactly the right way, but does that stop us from actually doing something? You see, one thing that businesses really focus on is the bottom line revenue. But one thing I can say about Niantic is we focus on our mission, which is to get people out active in communities. And at Niantic, we focused on, we want to reflect the communities that we supplied these games for. What do these communities look like? Well, they look 50% female and 30% underrepresented minority. But do we look like that internally? Are we building the infrastructure internally so that we can make sure that whatever we design and create has our players in mind? It's a work in progress, y'all, but we can do it together. The reason why I brought up the head, heart, and the hand is because in education, it's called the activation trinity. There has to be a process, whether you start with acting like, hey, I want to go protest. I want to get out there. And that's your activation. And then your heart's connected. And then your head, you're like, wait, I get the understanding. I know what information's out there. But if you don't have some form of understanding, feeling, you are not going to be effective in your actions. So what does that look like? So let's talk about how we develop our games. When you look at the life cycle of a game, you think of the concept, you go in depth on research on how much you want to make sure that this is applicable to the environment and to the people who are going to be playing this. You don't cut corners. And one thing when you're coming into the DEI work and culture work, a lot of companies love to focus on low-hanging fruit. Why? Because low-hanging fruit gives you that direct access to external media. Oh, y'all are doing great giving back to the community. Y'all are doing great with your employee resource groups. These are things that are low-hanging fruit because they're easy to accomplish with less overhead, but they are not sustainable for the long systemic change. High-hanging fruit is not sexy. High-hanging fruit means looking at your board and seeing, is there any women on your board? Is there any underrepresented minorities on your board? High-hanging fruit is looking at your leadership team and saying, hey, do we have any Black people who are a director or above? Quick question. These are things that could be done, but once you recognize that, there's a lot of work after that that has to happen. So I would like to actually go through each. I'm going to give a couple examples of what high-hanging fruit is and what low-hanging fruit is, and give some examples on how we can address these things. Are you ready for the journey? I am. Let's go. Low-hanging fruit. By no means am I talking negatively about anything on this chart. But what I'm saying is that these low-hanging fruit examples are not going to continuously create systemic change within your company. Employee resource groups are amazing. They're great to gather people together collectively, to get people excited about the business imperative of having a balanced workforce, and giving people power and the ability to assemble and educate people. At Niantic, our pillars are commitment, community, and partnerships, and culture. And in our employee resource groups, their leadership focuses with those pillars on how to educate, how to reinforce commitment, and how to create a safe culture for everybody. Is that important? Yes, it is. But is that systemically going into the cracks and using power to change up things that have been going on for so long? Not at all. Another thing is sponsoring diversity conferences. I believe conferences are great for development, empowerment, and getting people out. One thing that I love about Afrotech is that as a Black person in tech, I can go to this conference and see people who look just like me in so many ranges of different places and different levels and senior leaders. And I'm like, wow, okay, I need you to be my mentor. I need you to be my mentor. It's fun, but it's not addressing the fact that we struggle at hiring people of color in tech and not addressing the reasons why we struggle hiring people of color in tech. Compensation evaluation. I think if your company hasn't done this, this is a great start. Checking your comp eval and seeing where people of color fall, where women fall. Are women and people of color being promoted as fast as everybody else? This is a complete overhaul of going in to benefits. You know, some companies have better benefits than others. And if I'm a company and I'm like, hey, okay, this other company over there is getting all the talent because they have childcare, I'm going to think, okay, that's a low-hanging fruit. Let's just get some childcare, and then we'll get some more people that will want to work here. Community partnerships. Again, I'm not knocking any of these things. These are all very important. But it's very easy to partner with community organizations that are doing the hard work and you just provide funding and you think that you should receive all the praise because you're just providing funding. That's a great thing, you're providing funding, but what are you doing internally? Are you utilizing these tools and these things that this community organizers are using to impact the backyard of your company? Are you bringing them in? Are you creating access? It's one thing to provide funding for a community partnership. It's another to create an internship program where there's direct access from that community into your organization. Social impact. We all love to give back. I promise you, whenever we think about donating our time or our resources, it's usually something that's near and dear to our heart. And what I'm fighting for in this call and this talk is that DEI and having a balanced workforce becomes our passion, and it's near and dear to our heart. Just like saving the world so that we can live here. Obviously, we want to make sure that we have air, water, food, but also sometimes it's easier to impact a culture outside of your own because you can provide resources instead of looking hard in the mirror at yourself and saying, what am I physically doing in my space to empower people? Another thing is socializing culture values. If you're going into a company and you don't know their values, this is a problem because you are not necessarily seeing leadership resemble them. So re-looking at company values is important, and being able to say, are we practicing what we preach as leaders? Are we practicing what we preach as middle management? And being able to sit back and say, wow, our values are trust, accountability, and guess what? I have all those things. That's an A+ right there. But if your organization, if your employees see these values and they don't see them emulated in their leadership through action, it's just lip service. And guess what? The next generation to come actually cares about these things. They look into companies, evaluate, and say, where best should I take my talent? And as a company that provides entertainment, so to speak, for people, you definitely want your employees to feel empowered, valued, so that they're bringing their genius to work. Let's talk about some high-hanging fruit. I said not as sexy. The board and executive leadership seats. If your studio doesn't have an underrepresented minority, a woman or a person of color in a director level or above, then you have a problem. Because as someone like me, who may be an individual contributor, if I'm looking into the company and I see no internal growth, you're not going to be able to keep me for long. So understanding also promotions. Are people of color and women getting promoted less than their Asian and white counterparts? I think you should check into that data. It's pretty telling. Also with attrition, regretted versus non-regretted. Are people leaving faster as they're coming in? It's one thing to take so much effort into recruiting and into getting people in through the door. But if you haven't changed your management and changed your leadership on how to empower, develop, and actually give feedback to people, they're going to run out the back door. And there goes all the hard-earned effort and time that you've put into recruiting people. I talk about middle management all the time. I call them the frozen chosen. I know it's not the best term, but I call them the frozen chosen because middle management has so much weight on their shoulders to manage, to evaluate, to promote, to develop, but they're the most under-resourced employee. Are we giving our middle management the right training? Are we empowering them with coaches so that they know how to get to the next level? Are we giving them the ability to really look at the whole nucleus of the company and see how they are imperative to the bottom line of our company's resources? Middle management education and realignment is imperative to seeing if your company can actually practice what they preach. There are times when, in my career, it's been hard for my manager to give me feedback. And I've always thought, why is it so hard to give me feedback? But I realized I'm very different, I'm very vocal, and I'm not afraid of leadership. And that could be intimidating. So one thing that I, in my own journey throughout corporate America, throughout the game industry, has been to remind my manager that feedback to me means that you care about my development and you care about me growing within the company. If you don't give me feedback, if you don't give your employees feedback, you're not truly invested in their growth. And sometimes that feedback may be hard, but the fun fact is that if you tell me as a manager that you would love to develop me and you're giving me opportunities to do that, I am now more invested in this company because this company is invested in me. And then guess what? I'm going to bring all my innovative ideas. I'm going to go above and beyond because I know that you have my back. I'd like to highlight the bad apples. How many times do we go into companies and we see people who are bad apples and we just go, oh, they're untouchable. They're untouchable. They're just making a muck, but they're untouchable. And guess what? That's a problem. One way to build trust with your workers, with your community, with your employees, with your partners is to identify those bad apples and make a stand that you value, and whatever the values are of the company across the board, you're going to make the right decision. That's a tough one because guess what? That decision might be your best friend. That decision might be someone who helped you start the company. But guess what? If you engage with your board, if you engage with your executive leadership team and you make a plan, it doesn't have to end all bad. It doesn't have to end in a scandal. It doesn't have to end in a media frenzy because something that was done in the dark is now in the light. Getting rid of the bad apples sooner than later will prevent not only a huge PR issue, but it will prevent you having to use lawyers and different executives in that state to make statements to cover up or to justify situations that have happened. Our industry is hurting right now, and we need people who have integrity. We need people who are willing to step down if they know that they're not the right person for that position, or they've reached their journey's end. I'd like to dig a little deeper. I put some random stuff on here, but I'd like to dig a little deeper into the green light process. When a game is coming to green light, what are the questions that are being asked? Are we asking about the environment that it's going to be in? Are we asking about the people that it's going to touch? Are we asking about the team that's going to be creating it? Is it a balanced team? Is it a team that is open to unconventional ideas? Is it a team that's open to constructive criticism and feedback? These are all things that are imperative to building a world-class game. Now, granted, when I say that, in my head, the counteract is, well, the game industry has been predominantly white and Asian over the last 20 years, and they've created world-class games. But at the same time, you have to understand that your people are your capital. Your players love the game, loving the game, coming back with feedback, taking that and actually implementing it. That's what makes you agile. That's what makes you someone who can fast fail. Another thing I'd like to talk about is product development and evaluation. When we're dealing with products, we know that products have a life cycle from the beginning to the end with the death or maybe another reiteration of it. But at each step within that life cycle, where are we asking the questions of who's not in the room? Where are we asking questions on how is this product, this game, this platform going to affect the people who are engaged? That leads me into accessibility. Accessibility in games is huge. Just because the majority have access to using both hands, both feet, being able to walk, being able to dance, doesn't mean that differently abled people might not have struggles in those areas. And if we really want to build world-class games and build a world-class culture, we have to make sure that our culture is accessible to all people. And when we're building games, not leave people out just because it's a little bit more difficult to develop. We have these timelines that we create because we're so excited and we have crunch time and all these different things. But I beg you to think about all the people in the world who love entertainment, who love playing games, who may be in a wheelchair, who may be colorblind, who may not be able to use one or both of their hands. What are some things that we're doing in this innovative space with augmented reality, with virtual reality, with AAA games and all these different games that we have? Like the world is our oyster. So why not start making that a business imperative and making that part of even the green light process? Are you asking in the green light process, is this game accessible? Is this platform accessible? So all that to say is there's a lot of things that we can work on here. And honestly, I've only had 30 minutes to share with you, which is not enough time. I can't boil the ocean in 30 minutes. And I also can't write a book in 30 minutes. But I really do believe that these are all great principles that we can take that I would love to discuss with you further in the future to really create opportunities for change in this space. We are a special industry. An industry full of creatives, an industry full of people who love to have fun and get excited around community. Let's start allowing our internal community to look like the communities that we live in. And let's start allowing people to have access without jumping over hoops. I strongly believe that there are a ton of people out there who don't even know that the game industry is a thing. Growing up, I used to play Nintendo. Don't talk trash, but I wanted to make a game. And at that time, my parents were like, no, you need to be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a preacher. Why? Because those were things in their head that they thought was sustainable. Like, if I become a doctor, then I can provide. If I become a preacher, I'll have a job forever. If I become a lawyer, I can get access to areas that I wouldn't have access to. But I'm telling this generation, stop playing the game and start creating the game. With all that said, there's more to come. So holler at me. Here's my information. I would love to hear from you. And I would love to also work with companies that are interested in starting the journey. So let's get this party started. And thank you for your time.